The reception had barely begun when Brandon Summers, the groom, cut through the crowd holding a crisp $50 bill. He stopped in front of Larry, his new father-in-law, and offered the money with a smirk that did not reach his eyes.
Be a good janitor and tip the band for me, yeah?
Larry's hand tightened around his champagne flute. The chill of the glass was nothing compared to the cold spreading in his chest. Christine, his only daughter, stood 10 feet away, focusing intently on arranging her bouquet and refusing to meet his eyes.
That's the spirit, Larry. Good help is hard to find.
Larry said nothing. He turned and walked toward the bandstand, the 50 folded between his fingers. Without a word, he slipped the bill into the tip jar, his scarred knuckles catching the blue stage light. The bandleader offered a confused nod. Larry was already walking back to his solitary table in the corner.
20 minutes. You just have to survive 20 more minutes.
From his corner table, Larry could hear the groom and his father still laughing, their words indistinguishable, but the target unmistakable.
Did you see him? I half expected him to polish the glasses before he sat down.
I told you, son, never marry down. The genes always show eventually.
The bandleader glanced toward the corner table, a brief, apologetic look before turning back to his sheet music. Christine, now standing with the bridesmaids, looked toward her father for a heavy moment, then deliberately turned her back.
She saw, she heard, and she still said nothing.
Too bad they don't make a manual for social climbing, right, Dad?
A ripple of polite laughter spread from the head table, drawn by another of Harold's anecdotes about the little people who service their estate.
Dignity is a choice you make every single second.
He smoothed a wrinkle in the tablecloth, a slow, deliberate motion that quieted the tremor in his fingers. The night was young, and he was the loneliest man in a room of 200. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone and announced a special toast from the groom's father. Harold Summers rose, his glass catching the chandelier light, and began with the practiced ease of a man who had never been publicly contradicted.
We're so pleased to welcome Christine into the family. Her father's government background gave us all a good chuckle tonight. He shuffles papers for a living, I'm told. A real desk jockey, but he raised a fine girl, and that's what matters, isn't it?
Polite laughter rippled through the ballroom. At his corner table, Larry did not flinch, but behind his eyes, a far colder room materialized. A windowless laboratory 30 years ago, the hum of secure servers, the weight of a red-bordered document that could never leave that room. His hand had not trembled then. It had calibrated a guidance system that would never fail in a world that must never know. Back in the ballroom, Christine stood behind her husband's chair, her knuckles white around her clutch, but her mouth stayed sealed.
It's not my name they're dragging. It's theirs, and they don't even know it.
He folded his hands on the table, and the joke was not forgotten. It was being banked, deep in the same silence where he kept everything else. Every table had a program card, the evening schedule printed in gold. The final line read, "Keynote Address." Larry glanced at it, idly turning it over, and then the name caught him like a hand on his shoulder. Keynote Address, the Honorable Senator David Harper. Larry's pulse gave a single heavy knock. Senator Harper was no stranger to him.
David Harper. He hasn't seen me in 20 years, but he'll know the second he walks in.
Brandon's mother was already bragging loudly that the senator's appearance cost a fortune, proof, she declared, of real status. Larry set the card down and rose, excusing himself with a murmur that no one heard. The head table's laughter continued unabated. In the gentleman's lounge, he stood before the mirror, cold water running, studying his own face like a map of old secrets. His scarred right hand spread flat on the marble. The tremor was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar calm.
He met his own eyes. 20 minutes, you told yourself. Now you know exactly why you're still here.
Larry returned from the lounge just as the band shifted into a slow, sentimental waltz. The dance floor cleared. Brandon took Christine's hand, and under a single spotlight they began their first dance. From his corner, Larry watched his daughter spin in her white gown, her face a mask of happiness he desperately hoped was real. After the applause, Brandon's mother rose. She toasted to overcoming humble beginnings, her gaze flicking toward Larry with surgical precision. She added that Christine was fortunate indeed to have married above her station, and a few guests near the head table tittered. Harold gave a slow, approving nod, his smile as thin as the edge of a knife. Then the master of ceremonies checked his watch and stepped forward, his voice cutting through the music. He announced that Senator Harper's motorcade had just pulled up outside. A ripple of electricity shot through the room. Guests straightened, craning toward the grand doors. Even the band let the final chord hang in the air.
The 20 minutes were up, and now the real countdown begins.
The heavy oak doors swung open, and Senator David Harper stepped into the ballroom with the quiet authority of someone who had entered far more consequential rooms than this.
Senator Harper, what an honor. Right this way. We have the head table all set up for you.
Harold moved to guide him toward the head table, but the senator's eyes didn't follow the gesturing hand. He was scanning the room.
It's an honor, Senator. I'm Brandon Summers, the groom. We're so grateful you could make it.
The senator's glance slid past Brandon without a flicker of recognition. He was still searching, his expression unchanged. Harold pressed closer, trying to steer him left, but the senator's attention was fixed on a point across the ballroom. At the back of the room, Larry hadn't moved. His posture was still, but his eyes waited, hands folded on the table. The senator's gaze locked onto him. The shift was instantaneous. His face opened with recognition, warmth, and something almost like relief. Without another word to Harold, the senator changed course, walking directly past the head table and toward the solitary figure in the corner.
Here he comes, and every single person who laughed tonight is about to understand why I never needed their approval.
The senator carved a silent path through the stunned guests, who parted like water before a prow.
Senator, if I could have a moment, we've been looking forward to your address all evening.
The senator didn't break stride. Brandon's outstretched hand hung in empty air as the older man swept past. For the first time all evening, Brandon looked truly afraid. His mouth opened and closed without a sound. Around them, whispers ignited. A dozen conversations stuttered to a halt. Phones rose, their cameras aimed at the unfolding scene.
That boy has never been invisible in his life, not until tonight.
The senator was 3 steps away now. Time seemed to thicken. Larry could see the exact moment recognition became intent. Larry's right hand moved of its own accord, his thumb finding the familiar ridge of the old burn scar. A private anchor. The senator's face broke into a wide, unguarded smile, the first genuine expression he'd worn since entering the ballroom. The ballroom held its breath. 200 people, every last one of them silent, waiting for whatever came next.
Larry, he remembered. After 20 years of classified silence, David Harper remembered.
The name fell like a stone into still water. Christine turned, her champagne glass tilting unnoticed, her mind refusing to connect that famous voice to the man who had raised her. The senator opened his arms wide, and the gesture carried the weight of every windowless room where they had once worked side by side, saving a nation that would never know their names.
Why is he what is happening? That's my father, my janitor father. And a sitting senator is about to...
Larry's own hand rose halfway, a reflex from decades ago when a handshake in a secure corridor had sealed a pact that would never be discussed in daylight. Brandon, still marooned near the head table, watched his entire world rearrange itself in the space of a heartbeat, and for the first time since the ceremony, he had no words at all. Harold's Scotch glass fractured in his grip. He didn't feel the cold trickle of alcohol. The name was scratching at a door in his memory that he had locked 30 years ago. The senator stepped forward, closing the final inch, and the ballroom contracted around the 2 men like a vault ceiling, the air itself growing thick with the weight of the unspoken.
This is it. After everything, the secrets, the silence, the sneer of a boy who knows nothing, this is how they find out.
The senator closed the final inches and pulled Larry into a firm, unhesitating embrace, the kind shared by men who have carried secrets heavier than metals.
We thought we'd lost you to retirement, Larry. You saved more lives than this room will ever know.
That name, the Silent Missile Program, I signed off on those briefings 30 years ago. It can't be him.
Brandon's champagne glass shattered at his feet, champagne pooling like a confession he couldn't make. Christine's hand pressed against her mouth, but the sob still escaped, a raw, ugly sound that cut the thick silence. The entire ballroom became a diorama of disbelief, 200 guests frozen, every last one of them turned to stone by the magnitude of what they had witnessed.
He saved lives? My father. What don't I know?
Waiters froze mid-step, their trays tilted, but nobody bothered to correct them. The world had tilted too.
Silence had been his shield for 30 years. Now, in front of everyone who'd mocked him, it was gone.
In that one moment, Larry Cooper was no longer the janitor. He was the quiet architect of a nation's safety, and they had all been too blind to see it. Senator Harper kept one arm around Larry's shoulder, guiding him toward the nearest table, as if the two old friends were the only people left in the room.
Do you remember the night they tried to pull the program's funding? You walked into that hearing with one slide and changed the entire committee's mind.
Around them, the whispering had erupted into a frantic buzz. Dozens of phones rose, their cameras fixed on the senator and the man they had all dismissed. Christine pushed through the frozen crowd, her veil slipping from her hair, desperate to see her father's face, to find the man she'd known in the stranger the senator had revealed.
That man the senator is holding, he's the one who taught me to ride a bike. But tonight, he looks like someone I never really knew at all.
Brandon had retreated to the far end of the head table, his tuxedo jacket hanging open, staring at the shattered glass at his feet as if it might reassemble itself.
I sat in those classified briefings. I heard his name spoken in rooms where colonels bowed, and tonight I called him a desk jockey.
The senator gestured for the band to stop, then raised a champagne flute. The silence that fell was no longer stunned, it was expectant.
I don't think this room needs a keynote address anymore, but I will say this. The man you've been sitting across from all evening is one of the reasons you can sleep at night.
And as the entire ballroom, for the first time that evening, turned toward Larry with something other than pity or disdain, the old man's eyes found his daughter's and held. Senator Harper lowered his glass, his voice dropping into the measured cadence of a man who had delivered testimony in rooms where wars were averted.
Larry Cooper spent 30 years engineering the central nervous system of our missile defense grid. Every bolt that missed a city, every conflict that was deterred before it started, his work was the quiet reason.
The crowd's murmuring died completely. Waiters froze with their trays tilting. This was no longer a wedding toast, it was an unredacted footnote from classified history.
I remember those reports, the red-bordered ones I signed without reading the names. I increased his budget because the results were undeniable, and I never once looked at the engineer behind them.
He never asked for a promotion. He never took credit when the programs were declassified years later. He buried himself in a lab while the rest of us held press conferences, and he never complained.
Christine's hand found the back of a chair, her knuckles white. The word janitor ricocheted in her skull, a bullet she had let fly hours earlier. Harold's jaw worked soundlessly. He had once argued for a classified budget increase that saved the same program Larry had designed, and had never known the man existed.
So when I walked in here and heard someone call you a janitor, Larry, I thought I'd stepped into a farce. But then I realized you'd rather they believe that than have them know the truth.
The silence that followed was no longer disbelief, it was shame, spreading from table to table like a stain that no champagne could wash away.
He's giving them a window, not the whole view. And that's enough. That's more than they ever deserved.
Christine stood rooted a few tables away, her vision swimming. The senator's words still hung in the air, reordering 27 years of what she thought she knew.
I let him call my father a janitor. I stood there arranging my bouquet and I let it happen. I am no better than they are.
Her gaze shifted to Brandon, still marooned near the shattered glass. He looked smaller than he had all evening, his arrogance stripped to the bone.
He's not looking at my father with remorse. He's looking at the senator with calculation. Even now, he's measuring what he lost.
Larry's eyes found hers across the ballroom. No words passed between them, but the weight of decades settled in that single exchanged glance.
He doesn't need me to apologize. He just needed me to see him, and I chose not to. All these years, he carried everything alone.
She wanted to cross the floor and fall into her father's arms, but her feet were rooted in the concrete of her own silence. Around her, the wedding reception continued its surreal pivot. Servers hesitantly resumed pouring champagne, but every eye remained on the two old friends.
What do I do now? I'm the bride. I'm supposed to be happy. But my father is a stranger, and my husband is a coward.
And for the first time since the ceremony, she did not look away from her father. She held his gaze, and the dam behind her eyes began to crack. Harold walked toward the senator, his polished shoes carrying him to the man he had insulted all evening.
The silent missile program, that was you, wasn't it? You're the engineer.
Larry met Harold's eyes for a long moment, then gave a single, unhurried nod. Harold's outstretched hand trembled. The man who bragged of status couldn't steady his own fingers.
He's the phantom who stopped wars before they started, and I called him a desk jockey.
Guests caught the exchange. Whispers spread like fire, the truth racing from table to table. Senator Harper did not turn. He placed a hand on Larry's shoulder, speaking as if Harold had ceased to exist.
I signed his budget increase without a glance, and tonight I mocked him in front of everyone.
Harold stood frozen, a relic of a forgotten hierarchy, already fading as the senator's warmth enveloped Larry. The senator spent the next 40 minutes in quiet conversation with Larry, ignoring every other plea for attention. When he finally rose, the room shifted again.
I'm overdue in Washington, Larry, but you call me if you ever need anything. That's an old friend's request, not a favor.
You already gave me back something I thought I'd lost tonight, David. Thank you.
They shook hands, and for a moment the years peeled away, two men who had kept the country safe in rooms that never saw daylight. The senator turned to go, but paused beside Christine, who had been standing frozen near the edge of the crowd.
Your father is the finest man I've ever known. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Not tonight, not ever.
Christine's throat worked, but no sound came. She nodded, her tears finally spilling over. Then the doors closed behind him. Outside, the motorcade idled, the distant thrum of engines the only punctuation to his exit. Inside, the ballroom felt hollow. The music had not resumed. The wedding had become something else entirely. Christine was now just a few feet from her father, the senator's words pressing against her chest like a stone she could not set down. Brandon pushed off from the table and crossed the ballroom toward Larry, his steps faltering as if the floor had tilted.
Larry, I didn't know. If I had known who you were, I never would have spoken to you that way.
Larry raised one hand, palm out, a gesture so gentle it stopped Brandon's words in midair.
Not tonight, Brandon.
But I would have treated you differently. I swear it was a joke that went too far.
That's the point, son. You never needed to know who I was to be decent.
Christine, standing only a few feet away, heard every word. She watched her husband's face crumble as her father's quiet truth landed.
He isn't sorry for what he did. He's sorry he got caught. And I married a man who measures people by their title.
Brandon's mouth opened again, but no sound came. Larry lowered his hand and turned away, the conversation clearly over. And as Christine's gaze shifted between her crumbling husband and her unreadable father, something in her that had been wavering all night finally settled, hard and certain. Christine's hand closed on Larry's sleeve, pulling him through a velvet curtain into a service alcove. The ballroom noise died behind the heavy fabric. They stood in a small, dim space cluttered with extra chairs.
Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? All my life, I thought you were just a desk worker, and tonight I let them humiliate you like you were nothing.
She choked on the last word, pressing her fist to her mouth. Larry took both her hands in his. The scarred knuckles that had built missile defense systems now held his daughter's trembling fingers.
The senator said you saved lives. How could you keep that from me? I'm your daughter.
Larry didn't answer immediately. His thumb traced a slow line across her knuckles, the silence heavier than any speech.
Please, Dad. I need to understand. I need to know why you hid yourself your whole life.
He met her eyes, and in that dim alcove, the weight of decades gathered between them. The answer was coming. Larry's voice was steady, each syllable a stone laid on decades of silence.
Because I didn't need anyone to know, Christine. I needed you to love me for the man you grew up with, the dad who taught you to ride a bike, not some classified legend.
Christine's breath caught. The word legend hung between them like a confession.
If you had known, could you have loved me the same? Or would there always have been that shadow?
The question landed with the weight of 30 years, and Christine shattered.
Daddy.
She fell against him, her tears soaking the charcoal wool, her fists clutching his jacket as if he might disappear like a ghost. Larry held her, the same hands that had calibrated silent weapons now cradling the only thing he'd ever needed. For a long moment, the alcove held only the sound of her weeping and the quiet, steady beat of his heart. The velvet curtain parted, and Larry stepped back into the ballroom with Christine tucked close to his side, her eyes red, her chin raised. The crowd, still dazed from the senator's departure, shifted to watch them cross the floor. No one spoke. Brandon stood near the head table, a hollow caricature of the groom. His mouth opened as if to call out, but no words came.
I walked past my husband on my wedding night and felt nothing but the steady warmth of my father's hand on my back.
Larry's hand rested on Christine's back, the same hand that had accepted Brandon's 50 now steering her toward the real exit. As they passed the head table, Harold stared into his scotch, unable to look up. The glass in his hand was the only thing he still held onto. The band had stopped. The dance floor was empty. The only music was the soft rustle of Christine's gown and the finality of their footsteps. Larry pushed open the heavy door. The cool night air rushed in, a clean strike against the stale champagne and ruined toasts.
I'm not coming back to this life. Whatever is waiting outside, it's already more real than anything in this room.
Then the doors closed behind them, and the wedding reception, for all its opulence, became a memory that would soon feel 1,000 years old. 4 years later, the marriage that began with a sneer ended in a quiet courtroom and a final decree. Christine came home to the house with the porch, where her father's rocking chair had become his peaceful throne. He was grayer, quieter, and smiled more in that first month than he had in the previous 30 years. 8 years after the wedding that broke everything, she met a high school teacher from Queens. The second wedding was a garden arch, wildflowers, and a handful of guests who needed no last names. Larry walked her down the aisle, his scarred hand covering hers, steady as the day he had built a nation's safety. He lifted her veil, kissed her forehead, and placed her hand in the hand of a man who asked only that she be happy. There were no toasts about humble beginnings, no politicians, no sneers. Only a father and daughter, finally known to each other, laughing on a porch swing as the sun set. And that was enough. On a still evening, long after the garden wedding, Larry sat on his porch alone, watching the fireflies blink in the dusk.
30 years in windowless rooms, and I never once imagined this, a porch, a quiet sky, and a daughter who finally knows who I am.
The porch swing creaked softly, its chains worn shiny from years of use, a sound as familiar as the beat of his own heart. Inside the house, a framed photograph sat on the mantel, the second wedding, wildflowers, a teacher from Queens, and a father's steady hand. He seldom spoke of the past. But tonight, as the first stars appeared, he let himself remember the alcove, the tears, the single moment the world had finally seen him.
She asked me why I hid my life from her. The truth is, I was never hiding. I was just waiting for the moment the disguise wouldn't matter.
The swing was still. The fireflies had gone, but the old man on the porch didn't move, basking in a peace he had earned one quiet choice at a time. Some lives are measured by the secrets they kept, others by the love they protected. Larry Cooper, the silent engineer, had never cared about the first measure. And in the end, that was always more than enough. The years passed like the creak of the porch swing, unhurried, each one layering peace atop the old man's heart. Sometimes Christine would visit with two bright-eyed little girls who called him Papa Larry, and the porch would fill with a laughter that needed no explanation. On quieter afternoons, he would read about Senator Harper's latest committee appointment and smile to himself, remembering windowless rooms and the weight of a red-bordered file. He never went to Washington for a gala, never wore a medal, but the senator's letter, yellowed now in a drawer, was all the recognition he ever needed. One evening, Christine joined him on the swing, her head resting on his shoulder as the fireflies returned. She asked if he ever regretted the silence.
He looked at her, his only child, and the answer was there before the words, "I'd do it all again. Not for the country, not for the secrets, but for this."
She squeezed his hand. The scar that had once pulled a missile program from chaos now simply rested in the warmth of her fingers. The world outside continued its noisy revolutions, but here there was only the rhythm of shared breath and the long, slow setting of the sun. The sneer, the senator's embrace, the alcove tears, they had not been the end. They had been the door. And beyond that door, a quiet man and his daughter sat swinging gently, the stars emerging one by one, as if the universe itself was finally giving its approval. The porch was silent now, the swing barely moving in the night breeze, as if the world itself had grown reluctant to disturb the peace.
I once believed my legacy would be redacted documents in a drawer, but it was never the missiles, it was her.
He closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the night wash over him, the distant owl, the whisper of leaves. In the house, the photograph remained on the mantel, a witness to the second chance, wildflowers, a teacher, and a father's steady hand. The teacher from Queens had written him a letter once, simple and true. "Thank you for raising the woman who saved my life." Larry never framed that letter either, but he kept it in the same drawer as the senator's, the 2 pages proof that his quiet choices had echoed. The fireflies had gone, but the stars remained, ancient and unhurried. He rose from the rocking chair, his joints protesting softly, and walked to the edge of the porch. Looking up, he didn't see the classified satellites he'd once calibrated. He saw only the infinite sky, and he smiled. Then he went inside, leaving the porch to the night, the swing swaying once in the wind, as if waving farewell.